So our next paper is Bertram, who joins us from the Department of History, which I think is over there. You guys are in Sid Smith. Certainly going to win a prize for the most beautiful opening slide. Although if you're after, you've got time to work on it. Paper, The Class, Making Academic Data Go Viral in the Disinformation Age. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, especially to be able to speak with such interesting presenters today. And I see a lot of similarities already. So yeah, today I'm going to teach you or tell you a little bit about what I've been up to. And I have this secret that I don't often share, or I haven't been sharing in the academy, but that's that I run a large-scale open history class for sex workers on Instagram. And originally I started off doing this because I'm finishing a book now on the financial lives of sex workers in the 19th century. And I was listening to the community and I heard them saying, so many scholars come in and study us and then give us nothing in return. In fact, often they develop policies or help to develop legislative frameworks that really hurt us. And so if you're going to do something about us, it has to be with us. So I teach a seminar on sex work history here at the University of Toronto. So basically I created an Instagram version of that because in 2018, that's where all the sex workers were kind of, a lot of them were advertising, and they started to pile into the classroom. What I learned from this process was something that really surprised me, and it's about the bigger history behind and beneath these social media platforms. And I got critical and crucial insight into how these platforms treat academic and fact-based data because I was looking at them from the edges. So TikTok and Instagram heavily police any content that is labeled as having to do with prostitution. And I'll talk about that a little bit more today. But most of the best quality scholarship today coming out about algorithms are from people that are not talking about them from the center, from the creator standpoint, from the people that are kind of running the companies today, but the people that understand the edges of them. And this is particularly important as we move into the AI age, because whatever is wrong with these platforms is about to become amplified and automated. So it's critical that we take care of this as an issue that will affect all parts of society as we move into the AI age. So today I'm going to talk about algorithmic literacy, which is one of the foundations of understanding what the AI shift will do. You have to understand how do algorithms work. How do we also respond effectively to the infodemic, the flooding of online spaces with inaccurate and misleading information? And how do we deal with the issues that Ona brought up involving the program bias within these platforms? Because as we think about automation, as we think about amplification, just think about what's wrong now and imagine that getting way, way worse potentially. So what I like to do is I go around, I try to teach people about algorithms, and one of the things that I think is most important to see is like the story of like one person to like reduce the scale so people can connect, but then also to give them some data about the scale of the issue. So today I'm going to be showing you some stuff from Instagram and TikTok, and talk about why defending historical data and other forms of academic data are so crucial for the future of serving these big tech publics. So when I started this, I thought, well, what is a historian got to say about this? Well, it turns out that everybody in the tech industry references history. And they use these generalizations about history to say that they can predict the future. So here's Kai-Fu Lee, who wrote this popular book, AI 2041. And this is a very common sort of sentiment. Think about the tremendous benefits of electricity. In the course of human history, we have often been fearful of new technologies that seemed poised to change the status quo. In time, these fears usually go away, and these technologies become woven into the fabric of our lives and improve our standards of living. And this is pretty common. Like we see a lot of stuff when people are talking about the AI shift as being the fourth industrial revolution. They often provide some kind of a timeline. They're like, well, these are how the other three industrial revolutions went, so this is how this one will go too. And the problem is that these are not even just gross inaccuracies about the past. They're just factually incorrect, right? So people are proceeding with a completely faulty understanding of the nature of these major political, economic, and technological shifts, and especially their actual human impact. So I'm going to be talking about that today. So for example, in the tech industry, they often reference things, talking about like the advent of like manufacturing and like, the booming, like how the American economy kind of exploded. And they reference things like the cotton ginny, right? Or the cotton gin. So they say like this, think about all the wealth, right? But what they don't talk about, and really what they don't have access to the historical content about, is what it actually looked like during that time period, right? What are these technologies? What did they actually do? How did it play out for human lives? And in ways that are grossly underdocumented and underrepresented in the existing historical landscape, right? So people just don't have the historical literacy that we need to understand how technology actually affects societies, and especially as we move towards this vast scale. So here from Frankie Abbott just saying, Whitney's cotton gin and its descendants helped the southern states become a major agricultural force in the world economy on the backs of a growing enslaved population. So these technologies don't just amplify existing inequalities, they create potentially these vast chasms, right, where things like this have happened before. So when we're thinking about, these assurances from the tech industry, like people are always afraid of technology, there's something much deeper there. And again, it requires a return to history to truly understand the potential scale and impact of this technological shift. And of course, we're presenting here today in Canada. And I wanted to just remind everyone that the TRC has a call when it comes to the tech industry and to business as well. It's call 93.3, and it's to provide education for management and staff on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties, Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. And this will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. And this is something that in the tech industry right now, there's nothing like this that I've seen. They might have people coming in to do like a workshop on general awareness raising, but right now we don't have the historical literacy in the public, or we're not providing the public with the kind of historical literacy that they need to understand things like, well, what does that mean, Aboriginal Crown relations? Well, it means that if you're providing new software potentially that's going to be regulating things that are guaranteed under treaty, that they could fall under Aboriginal Crown relations, right? It's a big, complicated opportunity. So I focus on Instagram and TikTok, and there's a reason why. There's not a lot of us out there actually on these platforms. And they're notoriously neglected by scientists and scholars, but they have these massive and growing audiences that are only going to get bigger. And this is because the way that social media is shifting today is it's moving towards video-based algorithms, right? So we've been used to text, people pop stuff up on Twitter because scholars are comfortable with, we're like, give me the good snappy sentence, right? And we're uncomfortable with these image-based platforms. And there's real reasons why we're uncomfortable, and we need to figure out a way to make it more comfortable for people. Because these platforms are not a safe place to be representing views that can be attacked or representing populations that can be attacked. And that's why I run my account completely anonymously. So these have become major centers of disinformation, bias, and even political and military campaigns that have gone undetected. So in the Mueller report about the American election in 2016, he flags that Instagram, yes, is being used as part of the Internet Research Agency's campaigns. And yet again and again, we tend to go back towards like the Twitter-based campaigns, the Facebook-based campaigns, right? Because we're looking at the text. We need to start looking at the image and video-based algorithms very seriously. I'm going to show you some examples here. So this is coinciding with the growth of just like publics that constantly rely on video-based content, especially for news, right? So 90% of Americans use social media as news, and everybody under 40 is consuming stuff that's on video. And I would say under 50, and soon it's just going to be, everything is going to be video, or close to everything's going to be video. So instead of, being the old man screaming at the cloud, it's time for us to think about these as very serious forums, to think about them in a way that reveals what they are underneath, which are very powerful political global forums. So who is in the tech industry? Who are these lobbyists that are trying to control the narrative of technological evolution? They're actually kind of like this particular pool of people. And what's happened over time, over kind of like the evolution of the internet, is they've weeded out certain others, right? They've weeded out certain other people from positions of leadership, positions of influence, and we've as a result, we have this like remaining few that it's a profoundly homogenous group, right? It's overwhelmingly white men in the tech industry, and that doesn't reveal the real truth of the actual history of the internet, including the work of Asia Carrera, who was a early e-commerce pioneer. Like, she basically built her own early e-commerce platform as an adult performer in her home. And so honoring this kind of history is really important. And this quote is actually about like doing extractive research on sex work. But honoring this kind of history is really important because it shows people like kind of like what's behind the screen, right? There's much more to this technological shift than you might see at first. So as someone who's trying to mobilize content to an at-risk population, so sex workers face a lot of problems, including over-policing, unsafe workplaces, things like that. I had to learn a lot about algorithms because the word sex work itself is banned on Instagram. So it's kind of like a acrobatic version of data packaging. So just figuring out basically like what are the strategies so that I can take the data that I want to deliver and make sure that it's reaching the people that are asking for it. So Instagram provides these helpful tools to content providers. And if you're the kind of person they like, these are great. If you're not, they're really helpful to try to figure out like, how do I continue to provide this service? So you can see here, this is what they'll show you. They'll show you things like the geographic location of your followers, their gender, their age, and you can even kind of get deeper and deeper. And there's like firms that you can hire that can basically help you target whole populations. And I would argue this is also happening with government officials, that government officials, they're broadly targeting them, like they'll figure out their kind of demographic, and then there's a way where you can like look at someone's Instagram and be like, I bet like I've got a 50% shot that I can get this person to see some of my content in the next week, right? So this is understanding the algorithmic literacy gives you a lot of power. And it's a power that is outpacing the university at a really significant rate. So this is, there's no data out there on this, so I just wanted to use this example from my own work. So in my published academic work, I've got my book, a couple articles. I was very generous in saying I got 6,000 views on those in the past 5 years. That's a padded number. And then I went back into my Instagram and I said, how many views did I get on the content that used algorithmically literate kind of like ways of throwing stuff at the public? And it just got like a scale, like it's like my academic work doesn't even exist. So for those of you today that are thinking about doing something like this or want to teach your students how to do this, there's a lot of ways that you can make this happen. You can hire just like a social media company to help do this for your existing work. So all of your existing academic publications, your articles, your papers from today, you can deploy this out to the public. And they're really, really hungry for quality data, right? No one wants to willingly consume disinformation. No one's like, give me the bad data. The public is curious, they're hungry, and they're really, really frustrated that we're kind of absent from these platforms. But if you're going to do this, you have to do it safely, right? So if you come from an underrepresented community or someone who's targeted, Everything you fear about the internet is real. And safety comes first. So the only way that I've been able to do this for the past 5 years is by doing it in a way that was safe and comfortable. So this poses a larger risk to the AI shift. And scholars like Safia Noble, Timnit Gebru, Ruha Benjamin have written really important work about the dangers that the algorithms pose the biases embedded within the algorithm pose to the AI shift. So the bias, like when people are like, oh, there's a bias problem, like in the Google search results, or there's a bias, this really uncomfortable thing came up on TikTok, and they're like, oh, we fixed it. It's not a glitch, right? It's embedded in, they're building all these technologies, these algorithms, these viewpoints from biased data sets. So do we want to automate those and amplify those? No, we don't. We need to deal with this issue. I've learned a lot about it because of the way that I've had to kind of navigate data mobilization. Sex workers are used as a target population to train surveillance and exclusionary tech. So I've been able to have a front row view of like what that looks like, to have your account deleted or to be shadow banned and all of those things. But it can be used against any population, and that's what's significant and scary. Social campaigns are commonly used to target and eliminate undesirable content and populations. So famously in June of 2020, TikTok banned the hashtag Black Lives Matter, BLM, George Floyd, and things like that. And it was really the people that were using TikTok that saw it, right? If you're not engaged with these platforms or have someone who's engaged with them, you're not even going to catch things like that. So that's actually happened many different times, from like elections to, whatever. And we don't even have any documentation that these campaigns have taken place. BIPOC, queer, trans, and women creators and researchers are targeted and driven from platforms and industry. And this can happen with these sort of troll farms that you've probably heard about. So they'll have whole company offices. People get 11 cell phones with different SIM cards, and they sit around and they like go through like, okay, today we're targeting this. And they go through the accounts, they search the hashtags, and then they say to the other person, like on the other side of the room, hey, follow this account and then flag this. So it looks like people are actually talking to each other and they're real, and they are not. These are all sophisticated public suppression campaigns. So that's why when you're building content for these platforms and learning about them, you have to build safety, anti-racism, and equity strategies in from the earliest stages. And if you don't, inevitably, you too are going to start to replicate and amplify like a flawed knowledge mobilization campaign. And again, as Timnit Gebru warns, generative AI is supercharging these problems, right? So this is a much bigger issue than just one Instagram account. So a lot of people, when they start to hear about this, they say like, well, I don't quite understand what an algorithm is. And that is A-okay. We've actually been immersed in an environment where a lot of people in the tech industry are like, great, you don't know what an algorithm is? I'm so glad. So this is how I explain it to my historian colleagues. So algorithms, basically like these companies collect these massive data sets, and each piece of data you can imagine is one bead on this string, right? So algorithms can go in and basically encourage certain things for you, discourage other things from you. So they can do things as innocuous as saying like, it looks like you went for a run on your running app. Do you want to think about a new pair of running shoes, or like a new like track, or a new like app or something like that? So it's used very frequently in marketing. And marketing people can be real allies in this process, and I highly recommend working with people that understand this from marketing, because a lot of them are very good people and they have a lot to contribute. So algorithms basically use these really complicated data sets and these secret codes basically to encourage you and discourage you. And this is why emotional kind of like tracking is such a big issue, because they could do things like, how about I make you feel really depressed on the day of an election, right? You're from this particular demographic. I'm going to make you not want to leave the house. How do I make you feel really excited on a day when there's this thing that I want you to attend? Things like that. So it could potentially, and it is already, becoming like a real force in the way that we act. And I mentioned that this has political and military implications, and again, that we don't have a lot of data on this because we're not tracking it. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, Instagram was basically banned in Russia, and Instagram got really mad about it, obviously, and revealed Russia's information or their content mobilization accounts on Instagram. So it went in and it labeled any account that had this tie to the Russian government as Russian state-controlled media. And it was really surprising. I was following one of the accounts and I looked at it, I was like, what? And it was perfect for me. You know, it was the perfect account for me. It was all this like colorful, content about environmental solutions, and it was brilliant disinformation. And it just had like everything was good, except maybe there'd be one or two posts that had like a little bit of a tweak to them, right? So it's very hard to detect unless you have something like this. So Mafic was a marketing agency that was working for the Russian government. And they this shows them in the top 10 political news providers in the United States in 2020. They actually got to the top 5 in October of that month. So people didn't even know who they were, and they were creating, they were like behind, I think only, like they beat like ABC News, CNN was way behind there. There was nothing really that could compete with this kind of sophisticated, well-marketed and well-packaged content distribution campaign. So this is something that, as we talk about, what are the connections, right, between like different authoritarian states, like how are they communicating with each other? They're teaching each other this kind of stuff, right? They're getting really good at algorithmic literacy. This is another one of the Mafic accounts here. And you can see here at the end, the very last post was the the account owner signing off with like an anti-Putin protest message. And that's how you can kind of see, like she left this up, right? She didn't delete it intentionally. So you can kind of check out that stuff. And then when we think about things like, well, what's going on with the American far right now? Like, how do we get Roe v. Wade overturned? Like, what the heck is going on? And I think everybody kind of feels that way, like, this is a really sudden turn to the right. It's because a lot of far-right organizations have doubled down on things like algorithmic literacy and large-scale content packaging campaigns. So this is a quote from this Christlink SEO services. And SEO basically means, how do I Google something and make sure that my content is the first result, right? So the first page of a Google search result is a really powerful thing. So that's why these groups use SEO and they use Instagram to create these really powerful targeted campaigns. So when someone searches in Google, "I'm pregnant, what do I do?" a Christian organization that provides education and support for unplanned pregnancies will appear first to provide the services to that family while also sharing the love of Christ, right? So it's basically, it's these information campaigns that also spiral into information warfare. And these all have deep, powerful histories behind them. And I'm really passionate not just about teaching tech literacy to historians and other scholars, but teaching historical literacy to the tech industry, which is something that there's a real vacuum there and we need more. So for example, when MasterCard decided to bow to pressure from a lot of anti-prostitution groups to basically eliminate a lot of adult content providers from their services, they basically shut off the financial lifelines of many sex workers, not knowing that the very campaigns that they were being subjected to had roots in segregation campaigns from about 120 years ago, including the aggressive anti-prostitution panic called the white slave panic. This is Jack Johnson, who was the heavyweight champion, and he married a white woman. And this basically sparked these race riots around the U.S. and these hard crackdowns on red light districts. And so a lot of existing trafficking legislation and campaigns today is actually these old white slave panic narratives that are being recycled in. Joe Doezema wrote a really brilliant article that shows you exactly what those linkages are. So MasterCard all of a sudden is reenacting, right, this ghost, right, from 110 years ago and subjecting sex workers today to the same thing as a century ago. So here we see that a range of actors are stepping into the vacuum that universities leave when we avoid these kinds of content platforms. This is another one. It's called PrigerU. It's not a university, but it markets itself as a university. And you can see how many followers they have. They have 2 million followers. And they have whole branches that branch off of them, of paid content providers, social media strategists, that basically spread a really sophisticated and polished message about, basically it's a right-wing conservative message. And so it's like over in LA, they have like Hollywood actors. It looks like very diverse, but it's actually just this very well-packaged campaign. And so what they do is they fuel the anti-LGBTQ plus lobby, or it's one of the things that they do. And so you may have seen last week we had this revelation come out about an attempt, basically a plan to basically infiltrate all levels of the Canadian government with anti-LGBTQ political candidates. So this is something that's already happening today, but there's just another news story about it, just like how it would look at a federal level. And these people meet with American tech, this kind of like Christian tech lobby. So often scholars were like, well, the best thing that I can do is tell people in my classes, right? Or I can publish this article, or I'll speak even to the media about it. But that's not going to cut it. And that's because once people have been exposed to disinformation, they can never quite like get rid of the effects, right? You can unlearn it, or you can be like, oh yeah, that's not right. But it kind of sticks in your head. That's what we learned from the COVID anti-vaccine kind of movement. So as Sylvia Chu and her colleagues write in their 2020 article, information vacuums create the ideal conditions for misinformation to thrive, and several studies have found that corrections cannot completely undo the effects of misinformation exposure, right? So even if they hear one thing from you and they're like, oh, that person's at a university, if they've heard it 3 times on social media, like guess who's going to win, right? So we have to go beyond fact-checking. Debunking does not work. And the university needs to figure out what is it going to look like with the AI shift for us to address this very serious problem. This is an image from my favorite episode of Murder, She Wrote, when Jessica Fletcher kind of is like 30 years ahead of her time, and she's got AI goggles on, basically. So it's about looking forward, right? So what are we going to do across disciplines? What are we going to do in terms of standing up for data and for the public's right to accurate information? Well, we need to borrow a concept from computer science called data packaging, which is basically preparing content to like work in a system, right? So we need to start teaching data packaging. We need to start teaching algorithmic literacy, and we need to build larger scale data pipelines coming out of universities to displace, right? We need to displace and eliminate the vacuum. So doing this would require teaching people how to package data for max reach. How do we create larger scale, sustainable data pipelines for the disinformation age? So treating these as seriously, if not more serious, than academic publications. And this requires us fundamentally rethinking our relationship to the public. We are funded by public dollars. We serve a public, the public's purpose. Like, we need to be serving like them the content that they're paying for. So this will require also investing in a shift from not just digital literacy, so understanding how to put things online, and to algorithmic literacy, so understanding what exactly is going on right now, studying it, people from different stakeholder fields coming in and really focusing on what's going on in their field, and teaching and learning algorithmic literacy. And one thing I'll say about that is that about 70% of the grade 11 students that were just surveyed in this nationwide survey in Canada say they basically understand algorithms, right? So this is also a generational gap that the university needs to address, because those people are going to start university in 2 years, right? So we need to be providing them with the same kinds of tools that they're going to need to actually do this work for the AI future. So historians make terrible fortune tellers, but we are really good at talking about realms of possibility. So we're not going to be able to exactly predict the weird things that the AI shift is going to do. There's all kinds of, like ChatGPT, for example. There's going to be 100 ChatGPTs, right? There's going to be all these different tools that come out of the AI shift. The only way for us to make smart, informed decisions is to learn to do by doing, to invest in our own upgrade, basically. So I'm going to close today with a sample of what creating algorithmically literate content looks like for you. So if you're thinking about doing this or funding this, you're like, I've got a great book, I've got a great project, this whole topic is avoided on TikTok or Instagram, I'm going to give you 5 quick tips on how to make your content go viral, get those like millions of views. So you got to make your data stick. Make it, number 1, social. It's called social media for a reason. So there has to be a reason why people will want to share what you are saying, right? So it can't just be something super sad, right? Because it's going to go nowhere. Make it creative. Is it trending? You know, why would someone want to send this to their friend? It has to be timely. So make sure that it's responding directly to time-sensitive stories and trends. So what's going on in the day today? What are people talking about? Send them content about that issue that you know that is good content, right? So for example, on Remembrance Day, you could send them like a really interesting unknown fact about, like, you know, for me, I always do sex workers on Remembrance Day because I talk about sex workers in World War II, you know, members of the French resistance that helped fight Third Reich and things like that. And it's because people want to consume something that is giving them something, right? You're serving them something. Be an individual, experiment, but build a consistent style. You don't have to use your own face, and I don't. And there's a real benefit to that because you're creating the content for the topic, not about necessarily yourself. And make it critical. Give people one thing, right? Your book, for example, is like the whole Tim Hortons franchise. Your Instagram reel is a Timbit, right? The audience does not have time to sit and read an academic article. They're on the bus. Their kids are crying. They're trying to get groceries at the store, right? Give them one tiny thing. And then finally, kill easy pathways to algorithm-based censorship. So we need to understand the algorithms to make sure that that data is reaching the people that deserve it, and make sure that when things are happening on the algorithm, like voter suppression, the targeting of certain groups and things like that, that we know about it and we're talking about it and trying to contribute to the solution. So I'm just going to show you 2 ways that this could look, and then I'm going to finish up. So I want to show you what a low investment model looks like, okay? So this is sort of something I think for all universities to keep in mind. So right now what we do is some people might do some social media. The thing that people say to me often is like, well, why don't you get an undergrad student to do it? That's a low investment model. So this is an example of a low investment model Instagram. It's a really important Instagram. It should be the biggest Instagram out there. It's the UN Climate Change Instagram. And you can see they've got almost 1 million followers. It's not bad. But look at how many views they're getting on their content. 7,000 views on close to 1 million followers. That's not right. Something's wrong. And it's consistent. See, they're posting stuff that people they can't handle the content. It's too long. It's not targeted. It's not timely. It's not thinking about them, what they're doing. So it's not really serving them data. So this was likely, I would say, an intern that was trying to do a good job, but didn't have the funding and the support and the recognition that you need to make something like this work. And it changed, right? It changed. So this is from their most recent posts, and you can see they've actually turned around and they've done some investing. They've gone in, they've been like, okay, we have to like zoom in on the faces. We have to do infographics. Even here, like climate scientists read mean tweets. We have to do like trending issues. You know, so it's a way of packaging the data so that more people are going to pick it up. So in conclusion, I would like to say thank you for your attention and offer 3 recommendations that I think that we can all use right now as we think about the future. Number 1 is that we have to start studying mobilization itself. Data mobilization itself is a much more complicated issue with the AI shift. This has to be something that's not just in information studies, although they are one of the leaders in this field. But we have to think about how we can, in all disciplines, think about how data packaging can create better access to existing work. It's not safe, it's not equitable, we don't get recognized for doing it. That needs to change because it's not sustainable if it's not. So right now, Timrit Gebru writes, anonymity is a blessing, and that's okay. Shift. Universities around the world need to shift all of the way that we think about teaching the digital to teaching at least algorithmic literacy. All digital, basically, I think all education fields need to start thinking about algorithmic literacy so that people are prepared for the sort of advanced challenges that AI will pose in terms of the complexity of the models and their impacts. So this is a really exciting opportunity for a lot of scholars if we just get this baseline algorithmic literacy that is really not as complicated as it sounds. And you can just think about that UN model. It's about applying what you know into certain formats and then really focusing on it and deploying it to the public. So it's really like being a more active scholar, like a publicly engaged active scholar. And support. We need urgent algorithmic literacy and public-facing practices. They go together, right? So algorithms and the public are our two new priorities, in my opinion, that must address the infodemic and endemic bias as we move into the AI age. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. That was fantastic. You talked about providing an alternative to misinformation and building this incredible online course anonymously. How did you build trust in you as an expert and in the information you're providing without attaching your sort of, expert profile to it?
That's a good question. So how did I build trust with the people that I brought into my classroom? I basically really listened to them. I listened to what they were asking for. I looked at things that were affecting them. So big legal cases that we're going through, trending issues, and also listening to the leadership from that community, because the leadership will tell you, if they're representative, they're coming from the community, they'll highlight for you what's going on and what's important. And then you as a scholar can kind of translate that and be like, well, actually, I know a lot about this one particular law, and I can tell them one thing about its history, and things like that. So it's like a translation, but it's more dynamic than that, and it's more intellectual than that, because you're constantly basically having a conversation with the community that you're trying to serve.
So did you find that this Instagram population that you were reaching out to could easily distinguish between misinformation and reliable information when presented with reliable information?
No. I mean, the people that follow the account, it's a lot of sex workers, but it's also people that are just curious. And it's no competition for the professional people that are doing the anti-prostitution campaigns, right? It's like Niagara Falls with like a garden hose beside it, So my assessment of kind of like people's disinformation literacy right now is the younger generations really know disinformation, but it's made them basically not trust anything at all. And now they've basically stopped consuming any kind of fact-based content because they're like, there's a good chance this is disinformation, so I'm just not going to consume anything. That's a really big problem. And then as you kind of like go through different demographics, they've got varying challenges. So of course, like older demographics that are using using platforms uncritically, say like Facebook or maybe Twitter, they are kind of like, they have a lower disinformation literacy rate, right? So they'll just consume a lot of different things and then, get really stressed out. And this is where we see a lot of the mental health challenges sort of spiking with these platforms, because people don't know what's behind the screen. Mm-hmm. They don't know that it's actually deliberately making you feel a certain way, or, trying to like make you stay on your phone for 3 hours and things like that. So yeah, it really changes. But the best thing that I could do was try to experiment with how do you cite an academic article in a TikTok? Like what, in a way that someone's like, okay, I can actually get that academic article if I want it. And there's all kinds of challenges there. Like most of our academic articles, you have to pay $35 to read, right? So there's all these like built-in problems where the university itself, it seems, has also sort of created the infodemic in a way, or co-authored it as well, by withholding so much content. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, no, I kind of like this idea of, fighting fire with fire and just flooding the misinformation with good information. But that's also a question I kind of have on my mind. Is it enough to just, put out more good data? Because I think the younger generation is very mistrustful of everything that they read online. So I guess I just want your opinion on, is it enough to do this?
Honestly, the potential scale of this kind of thing could be quite phenomenal. What I would do in your situation or with your question is I would find like the youth leadership from that demographic, and I would collaborate with them and I would talk to them, because they're going to know all different kinds of things about their, social media is social, right? Like it represents certain bonds, certain connections. So it requires these kinds of partnerships to create stuff that other people, that's legible for other people, So you do really need to have like a strong working relationship with your stakeholder community to make sure that works. And when you do have that, it's amazing what can happen. I've seen wild stuff happen where people really connect with something you're doing and they'll blow it up to like a huge following. So it has a lot of potential. We focus on the problems and we don't see this like phenomenal opportunity. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Thank you so much for the talk. I have 2 questions. So the first one is, I want to get your opinion on how celebrity scholars sort of fit into this discussion, especially ones who have some academic backings and knowledge, but say they are a physicist right, and then they start talking about history and stuff like that, and for a lot of people, that gives them a lot of credence because they've done the intellectual work in some other area.
Yeah.
So that's something I would love to know. And then the other thing is, so quite a few years back, I think, so there's been, like content platform like YouTube is not really friendly, especially ad-wise, in terms of like long-form videos, right? So a lot of the content creator that do sort of documentaries and stuff up to 40 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes on YouTube, sort of band together and move to like a separate platform where they can share ad revenue and do like long form, really in-depth documentary. So I'm wondering, so the bigger question is perhaps like, do you think we should try to fight fire with fire on Instagram, or should these educational organizations try to align ourselves with something else, right? Some other platform that's still like a social media platform, but fundamentally is not about quick form, like 40-second short video, because like you said, it's hard to do any sort of referencing on those. Whereas if we align ourselves with like documentary platform, then maybe we can do referencing and stuff like that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. That's brilliant. And what that would do, so just to recap, so what's being recommended is like, can we basically build a second platform for more critical content that's not as heavily policed? That could be like a partner with the content that you would make for YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, because you can't say certain words on Instagram, right, without getting shadow banned or something. I think that's a brilliant idea. And what the strength of that idea is that we can stand up for the access to that data. So we can do the outreach, talk to people about like, there is this article, there are these studies, come over here to this platform, and it could be like a video version of the University of Toronto Library. It's like, here's the article, or here's like a packaged version of the article. And I mean, that would just be spectacular. I would love something like that. The question about celebrity scholars, I laughed at first, but then I have to stop laughing, because we have to think about what is going to motivate people to buy into this. This is a real problem. I find that a lot of people, they're going to get punished basically for doing this kind of work. They don't get recognized as an academic. I know people that hide this. They'll run like a huge, brilliant, like I don't know if you guys follow Rendering Revolution on Instagram, but you should. Brilliant scholar from the US, and he basically hid it from his job profile when he was like on the job market, because he was like, no university will hire me if they find out that I do work on Instagram. But he's like providing the most cutting edge, like amazing work to big publics, right? So there's this kind of exclusionary model, a bit of an elitist model that we need to break away from in the university, and think about even just like what's going to motivate people to invest this time. Celebrity stuff, I mean, the ego stuff, yeah, I mean, that's what motivates people. I'm not quite sure. Like, I'm not the person to maybe to talk about that, but we need to show people that if you do this, it is good, and we stand behind you, you know? So I think the celebrity scholars, some of them that are out there right now are, you know, they're doing things that are questionable, and a lot of us are like, oh God, I don't want to do that. But what would the better model look like? That's maybe the most important question. Yeah, question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess a couple comments. I mean, one is that there's a number of other models that you see in sort of specific issue areas where there's like a multi-pronged strategy where it might not just be response. It might also be like, how do you algorithmically drown out a particular piece of content that may be problematic rather than removing it? How do you try to change culture within a particular platform? Like on gaming platforms, there's efforts to try to address certain behaviors rather than maybe removing users or removing content, but trying to moderate behaviors, and also trying to like just thinking through things like safety by design and stuff like that through at the outset. But like a lot of this comes back down to how do you align incentives, and I think that one of the big challenges is that like with this stuff, you're sort of playing the game of many of these misaligned incentives. So how do you kind of get into a place where we're actually starting to align incentives in a more public health way?
Oh, yeah, that's so brilliant. And I think too, you know, when we get into things like those questions of like, how do we deal with the issue of bias or hate speech or something like that on a platform? Again, the displacement issue is so big, and many of the people in the tech industry, from like OpenAI to like some of the biggest scholars, of what they say at the end of their speech is usually, we need social science and humanities scholars to help us. And you know what? We don't show up. We don't show up because we don't have the algorithmic literacy. We're disincentivized by our universities to actually have those kinds of conversations. And so what we could be doing are things like a version of this, where it's like, what's the issue on the platform? Like, what are they talking about? And then like providing people with like tackling basically the disinformation itself or the bias itself through just like access to better content. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. Kind of misaligned incentives. That's exactly what it feels like. Yeah, thank you.
Oren, and then I've got a follow-up.
Right. Thanks for a wonderful presentation. When I was reading on the SRI before coming here, just before its inauguration, I think Yoshua Bengio said something like, this is technology disrupting the humanities. So now I see, you know, with this panel and some afternoon ones, you know, the humanities disrupting technology, so that's very cool. So my question is a bit of a provocation. I mean, I agree that you know, the academic model of getting information across is defunct. But you know, there's this other complaint. You know, the complaint about the Timbit, that a lot of information these days is packaged into these like 30-second bites, where you know, we can't say what we like or dislike or angry at or afraid of. But actually, anti-racism work, anti-sexism work takes like a lot of debating, and it's actually a lot more complicated, etc. And that we're cumulatively creating this like attention economy, or playing into the attention economy with these like sound bites that's actually sort of making critical debate a little bit sort of less likely or less interesting. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's really an important question. So basically, like this new short form content, which most public content is these days, very short form because of our reduced attention spans. Is it just basically avoiding the complexity of these debates? My experience has been that it's like in a class where you like pause the lecture and then you give the students a chance to chat. You're like, okay, we covered this now, so chat. The chat part is actually more robust than you might imagine. So people go into the comments and they start talking to each other. And then you can do things like do partnerships with other like representatives in your field, and do like you can do basically like side-by-side videos and like debate with each other, or like kind of make little points. So the way that the discussion happens is really unlike the way that we have discussions now, but it definitely is still happening, and it will just look very different. The great thing is that it's got like a phenomenal engagement rate. like way higher than academic content. And so I think we need to look at the strengths and then like experiment with what the models could look like. And that's what we all need, I think, right now, is that experimentation, exploration, not being afraid to fail or to try something that's unusual, because we do have kind of a perfectionist model in the academy. So it's a bit of a lab, you know, it's like, well, let's find out.
So I wanted to just to talk about your framing of this as algorithmic, and in the following context that when Twitter opened up its API or opened up its algorithm a couple of months ago, what was remarkable to me was how unsophisticated it was.
Yeah.
Right, that it was just basically that the kind of upvoting or the promotion of a post was a really simple linear function of three things. Whether was it liked, was it reshared, did it have a certain type of content? And I thought, boy, if an algorithm that slowly can completely divide societies, that's simple. There's really something going on here, but it's not the algorithm, clearly, right? It's the interaction of it with humans' desire for motivated reasoning, for entertainment, for simple over complex, right? For short over long. So I'm just I don't mean to be pedantic in asking it, right? But how much of what you're talking about is really not actually algorithmic awareness so much as like psychological awareness of humans, like thinking about what it is they're going to want it in their own algorithms, not what's going to be promoted by the platform alone.
Yeah, that's the big question. That's a brilliant question. So the difference, I guess what we need to understand then is that all of these platforms are built with psychologists that sit down and help computer scientists figure out and designers figure out how do I build these psychological insights into the platform itself. So the company says we want to encourage people to feel really happy when they use this app. How do we do that? And then the psychologist can be like, well, this is ways to do that. And then the computer scientist figures out, well, this is how we could kind of pull this kind of content and then promote it and then figure out a timing component. So there's these really sophisticated teams that it's more than an algorithm. You're so right. And I love, I don't know if people follow the American organization All Tech is Human, but their name is exactly that, right? This is all humans, right? We're all just a bunch of humans figuring out really complicated things to create certain kinds of results, right? So yeah, the algorithmic kind of like spectacular sort of like display that we often get from tech companies, you're right, you look beneath the surface and there's a bunch of people there and they're kind of doing easier things. Yeah, thank you.
I think we'll go to the last question here and then we'll have lunch. Sorry, Lynette was in the queue too. Go ahead and then we'll go to Lynette. Yeah.
So one question based on a previous question. What was the documentary platform you were talking about? What one?
Nebula? Fascinating. I'll check that out.
And then a couple questions about, do you have any recommendations for how to see what's trending? And also, how does copyright work in terms of if you wanted to post a graph from a paper and then explain it in like a TikTok format?
Yes.
Can that be tracked back and could you get sued for that?
Yeah, good question. So I do all of my work as a professor at University of Toronto. So if you're a student here or whatever, my understanding of it, and this is where we need like a more robust conversation with people that work on copyright at this university, because these are huge, huge questions and one of many, right? If you are providing content for educational purposes, in Canadian law, that falls under fair use dealings. That's how I conduct what I do. Whenever possible, I use content from, an archive or whatever, just to sort of cover myself. But yeah, I think that's a great question. And then just figuring out like what would be sort of an equitable and fair attribution. So like, how could you say like this graph was made by this scholar, right? So just I think if you make like I'm not a lawyer, so I can't offer you legal advice, but what I do is I think like, is this educational? Am I serving this up to the public for educational purposes? And am I doing my best to attribute the work to the person that made it? Yeah. And then, sorry, what was the other question?
Do you have any good ways of seeing what's trending?
Yeah, it depends on what you want to see. So of course you can craft your own topic. Instagram, keep it as a separate account from yourself and start creating and following content on that issue, and soon your feed will automatically sort of like the top trending issues. You can also do a search using the hashtag and see like what comes on the Trending Today page. And it's also a really good way to audit sort of like how certain topics are represented. Yeah, the platform itself is an amazing analytical tool if you're thinking, if you're like using it critically, I think. Yeah, thanks, good question. And Lynette.
Yeah, so I want to know how much time you spend on social media a day.
No,
Don't answer that. On a more serious note, as a historian with a long historical lens, so do you see AI as just another technology, or do you see it as an industrial revolution, like steam engine, electricity, the internet, and then AI as a kind of the fourth wave?
Good question. The first question is the most important question, though, because it has to do with my health. It has to do with the sustainability of my project, right? And me using a tool rather than a tool using me, right? So in my class, I teach a class on history and algorithms. I have all the students read this book called Digital Minimalism, and I follow it to a T. And I bet my screen time is lower than anyone in this room. So what I do is I created myself a statement of technological use, and I basically sat down, not on my computer, and wrote, this is what I want to use this tool for. These are my priorities. You know, I want to spend time with my family. I want to exercise. I want to do reading. And I'm going to use this tool for this. So I'm going to use this tool to run this class. I'm going to use this tool to prep for presentations. And I'm going to consume it as minimally as possible. And I use an app called Opal to do that as well. So these apps are designed to suck you in, and no matter how strong you think you are, you will be sucked in because they're designed with psychologists. And you can watch this great documentary called The Social Dilemma that gives you kind of a breakdown of what that looks like. And then in terms of like, is this the fourth industrial revolution? It is, but I would not say necessarily that the AI shift is the start of it. It's older, it's bigger, and then what comes after AI? Like, so with the metaverse, for example, last year I had someone ask me, would you do an interview about the metaverse? And I was like, okay. And they asked me, do you think the metaverse is going to take off? And I immediately thought back to like so many of these spectacular moments in history where people are like, this is the next big thing, you know, and there's so much just like glitter and so much of a facade. And I don't know, I think that's kind of front loading, you know, so it's really good to be very critical when people are saying this is the next big thing. But are we in the middle of like a massive technological transformation, economic transformation? Absolutely we are.
Okay, join me in thanking Elke. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you very much.